Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. It is 3 p.m, of course, here in the UK, and it is 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and you're all most welcome to join us here at 0 Days Live. Hello there, everybody. It's Friday. Hope you're all doing well. My name's Stuart Reed, and welcome to our Fun Friday edition, where today we are going to be celebrating National Solitaire Day. I have my pack of cards right here that we'll play a little game of in a little while. It's not strictly speaking solitaire we're going to be playing, but we will keep it within the theme of playing with cards. Now, during today's show, we are going to be marking the end of the penultimate week at 0 Days Live, and it is show number 37 for us. In a few moments, we're going to be joined by today's special guest, Adam Drabik, industry CISO. But before that, I wanted to just give a few words of thanks. First word of thanks goes to Kerry, who has continually embraced our themes each and every day here at 0 Days Live and has been a very active contributor to the show. I'm sure you'll agree. I'd also like to thank Lindsay, who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that each of our special guests are looked after, and she really is our show producer. I'd like to thank Lizzie as well, and also Lucy, and also Jason. Between them, they make sure everything happens behind the scenes technically for us, so that we have a live, seamless show brought to you every single day. And of course, I would like to make special thanks to Steve, who has not only endured my jokes over the last 37 episodes of 0 Days Live, but has also done a fantastic job of stepping in when we had a mild blip a few episodes ago, and also running the whole show yesterday. So much so that, in fact, he will be stepping in to fully host our remaining 3 shows next week, as today also marks my last day in the current series. It has been an absolute privilege to be part of such an enjoyable show. I truly feel I've learned a lot from our special guests, and also from Kerry and Steve when we speak every single day. And I'd like to think that we've created an accessible community that you have all enjoyed tuning into as well, either with us live or on demand at your convenience. And my final word of thanks, therefore, of course, goes to all of you for tuning in and making 0 Days Live what it is. And never say never, because who knows, after our initial run of 40 live shows concludes next week, perhaps season 2 will present itself. Who knows? But back to today, and as always, as we do every single day of the week, we ask a burning question on this show. And this week's burning question is, what lessons have you learned in lockdown? So do please let us know by simply typing into the console on your screen. Now, for me, I can't think of a better example to answer this question than team spirit. Lockdown has created a huge amount of uncertainty for us all, but for me, it's also shown the art of the possible. And I've perhaps seen more of the can-do attitude during these uncertain times than perhaps even ever before that. And I really do hope we can hold on to that can-do attitude as we emerge the other side of these pretty uncertain times right now. Steve, apart from learning that you are an excellent host of an equally excellent show, what lessons have you learned in lockdown?
So today I've got a new one, because it's a bit of a story that's happened today. I've learned that whilst you can teach a child to make food that's quite complicated, so perhaps a shepherd's pie, perhaps a cake, perhaps some cookies, don't assume that they can then do the simplest of things. Because one of our children earlier on was making lunch, decided to make super noodles, so far simpler than some of the other things she's made, and put them in the microwave without any water, and they set fire. So yeah, don't make any assumptions about the capability of your child's ability to cook food. Is the thing I've learned.
Good lesson as well. I would imagine that you're still got your doors and windows open to try and get rid of the charred smell of crispy noodles.
Yeah, who knew that they could create such a horrible stink?
Well, you heard it here first. Thank you very much for that, Steve. And everybody tuning in, please also let us know what lessons you have learned in lockdown, and we'll read them out. Simply type questions into the panel on your screen on the right-hand side. Now, this show, as I've said a number of times before, and I'll say it again on my last show, it really isn't the same without you all tuning in and joining us each and every day. And we are delighted to welcome our regulars and also our new audience members every single day as we start to build out a highly accessible community to bring people together, hear from industry experts, get a roundup of what's going on in the news, share some thoughts on best practice, and of course, as regulars to this show will know, interject a bit of good humour along the way. Now, with that in mind, we do cover and have covered a huge amount of important subjects during the time we've been live, but we don't take ourselves too seriously either. As a quick reminder, for each of our 30-minute or so shows, we are absolutely live each and every day. And as such, there have been, and there are bound to be perhaps a few more blips along the way, but when and if they do happen, we hope you look back with fondness and remember it is just part of the reason that you came and joined us as for part of your day. So thank you for that. Also, remember that whilst we are live, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we are also here for your convenience to on demand. So simply search for 0 Days Live. And please do get involved if during today's show or any of the other live shows that you're joining, you want to ask a question or give comment, please do so by using the console on your screen and Kerry will read them out during the webcasts. And speaking of Kerry, good afternoon. How are you?
Hi Stuart, I'm great, thank you. And can I just extend some thanks to you as well for being a tremendous host for the last 37 episodes, and we are going to miss you for the last 3.
Oh, that is very kind of you, Kerry. Thank you for that. It's been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed every single moment of it, and I really hope that everyone else has as well. So thank you for that. So what lessons have you learned in lockdown?
So again, I've chosen a great day for it, but my lesson today is always have a roller banner handy if you've got a long period of time working from home. I might regret it today as the windows are open and it's a bit windy and I can see it swinging in the back, so it might come on the head. But it does hide a multitude of sins behind your webcam. So that is my recommendation for people who continue to work from home. Get something to hide the things that you have in the background.
Excellent. Well, good piece of advice. I can actually see it gently swaying there, so I hope that's all it is, because it would be a bit of a disaster otherwise. Now, speaking of what could be a disaster, before we do welcome today's special guest, I want to do a quick nod to National Solitaire Day and play a game that isn't actually solitaire at all with you and Steve. So are you up for it, Kerry?
Absolutely.
I can see Steve's up for it. I didn't need to ask twice there. The card game, Steve.
A game I can win. Right, okay, let's go for it.
Well, we will see. So we're going to play a game of higher or lower. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out a card. I'm going to show it to you, and that is going to be the base card. And we're going to ask you in turn to guess whether the next one's going to be higher or lower. We'll take it in turns. The person that gets it right and the person therefore gets it wrong becomes the winner of it. Now, just very, very brief rules. Ace is high. So if I present you an ace, that's the highest you can get. So if I do, then you're going to have to go lower. Okay, clear?
Mm-hmm.
As mud. Good. Let's see how it goes. Right, here's my first card. Kerry, I'm going to come to you first. So first card is a king. Higher or lower?
I'm going to go lower than a king.
Lower than a king, she says. It is a queen. Oh, just so yes, 1 to you. Now, base card is a queen for you, Steve. Is that higher or lower?
I froze.
I know. Dramatic pause there, Steve.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I froze for a second. I was like, oh, so I've got to choose higher or lower than a queen, right?
Yep.
Lower.
It is a jack.
Oh, have you shuffled these, Stuart?
It's almost like these haven't been shuffled very well. Hang on a minute. Maybe I should. Maybe I should
do that. This could be a really easy game. Let's keep going.
This could be a game that goes on for a while. We hadn't really accounted for that. Right. Okay. I've shuffled them a bit. Kerry, higher or lower?
Fishing though, don't forget to say about the suits of these innovative cards that you are using.
Well reminded, Kerry. Yes, you may notice, everyone at home, that these cards are actually nodded toward either phishing or ransomware or general malicious activity. So they are all branded, and I guess regular viewers of the show would expect nothing less from us. So, but yes, thank you for pointing out. So, Jack, higher or lower?
I'm going to go lower than a jack.
It is. It's queen.
Ooh. I mean, I win.
If
I
Steve
win by default.
right, we're going to say
Oh.
he's won. So is it lower? Is it lower or higher than a queen?
I think it's lower.
Yay, but only just.
Yes.
Right, well done, Steve. You've won. Ooh, right.
What do I win?
You win the privilege and the pride of knowing that you are the winner.
Amazing.
Can't
That's
say fairer
all I
than
can
that.
hope for.
Can't say fairer than that. Right,
Absolutely.
without further ado, let us welcome today's special guest. Well done, by the way, Steve, and hard luck, Kerry. So, as I mentioned a few moments ago, very pleased to welcome to our virtual studios today, Adam Drabik, who is an industry CISO. Hi there, Adam. How are you today?
Very good morning, very good afternoon to everyone, and yourself, Stuart. Of course, thank you for the invitation. I'm very well, as well as you can get, I guess, in this sort of strange times and conditions. But so far so good.
Brilliant. Well, I'm so pleased you're able to join us today, Adam. Look forward to getting your insights from the industry in a few moments. But a couple of important things, because of course this is our Fun Friday show. First thing, what lessons have you learned in lockdown?
Wow, that's a difficult question, right? I guess for me, generally in the lockdown, it is how much effort and energy it takes to homeschool a 6 years old and an 8 years old kids, right? So that's a daily challenge, and I think hats off to obviously teachers of primary school of being able to actually do that. That's a much tougher job than a CISO job.
And now I think that a lot of people can certainly relate to that, so thank you for that. Now, the other thing that we do on a Fun Friday edition is we play a game of what socks are you wearing. So if we're able to bring up the slide, this is a question we asked earlier. So what we do is get each of our guests on a Fun Friday to guess whose socks are whose. Now, clearly you are at a little bit of an advantage because you know of those 4 pairs, which one is already yours, but you don't know the others. So let's start left to right on your screen. Whose are those socks on the first picture, Adam?
Well, I think the orange ones belong to yourself.
Very good, very good. Well done, Adam. Well deduced.
Right.
Right, second pair.
The light grey one. I'm saying Steve's.
Steve, is it you?
It is. Notice I tried to get a bit without any hair on it just to make it a little bit more interesting this time, but
interesting. I hadn't noticed that at all, actually, Steve, but well done. You didn't try and get it more interesting with a different color pair of socks, though, I noticed. Anyway,
well, yeah.
Third pair of colored socks are whose, Adam?
Well, that would be mine. Well, it's the
Which
odd one
means-
out. It's the odd one out. So there you go, right? Easy to guess.
Well, you were in good company, as I've just mentioned. So the fourth pair of socks must be, and I have to say, very color coordinated and on brand, Kerry's.
Thank you very much. They are mine.
Nicely done. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking part in a little bit of our fun element of our Fun Friday show, Adam. But let's get back to the serious business of what's been going on from a cyber news perspective this week, as we do a bit of a retrospective. Because this week, as with every week we've had on ZeroDaysLive, it's been very interesting for us. We've discussed cyber insurance. We've looked at the potential new way of looking at third-party risks. We've also been given an expert's view on zero trust access, particularly in this new world of mass remote working. And so today, Adam, with you on the show, we'd like to discuss one of the more interesting headlines that's actually popped up during the course of this week. It's the EasyJet breach, of course. This was announced earlier in the week. It's impacted something in the region of 9 million customers, I think, including more than 2,000 of which had their credit card details compromised. Now, Adam, EasyJet say there's no sign of misused personal information yet, but could this happen? But what could happen rather with access to these kind of credentials?
Well, I think the challenge is that obviously the company that have potentially lost this information or lost control of this information is sometimes not really seeing that information being misused elsewhere. Things like what's been published as in people's email addresses or physical addresses, names, and some other details, could be misused in all sorts of ways. Getting bogus credit and sort of loans, and sort of all sorts of cases of stolen identity. So there is potentially quite difficult consequences for the end consumers. I think that's the challenge. Obviously, for the 2000, which have been sort of confirmed to, at least for now, that in credit card information has been lost as well, there could be an immediate impact in terms of all sorts of fraudulent transactions popping up. Generally speaking, credit card information is the most sort of commonly stolen, valuable information on the internet, I would say, and traded within that sort of network of criminals. And the obvious gain is just stealing money or buying goods and and sort of defrauding the retail companies out of goods based on those details. So my advice, I guess, for now is at least for those who could have been affected, is just to monitor the activities on their accounts and speak to their banks and financial institutions, pointing out that they've been affected, as some measures may be specifically put in terms of additional monitoring and so on. However, to be fair, we've seen so many sort of stolen credit cards and big chunks of data stolen on the internet. I think the companies have learned now, especially the credit providers, of watching and capturing fraud before it actually sort of impacts the end user, before the user or the end consumer actually notices. And sometimes it may be your credit company that will phone you and say that that they see some fraudulent transactions and they need to sort of refresh your credit card, change the details, and sort of issue a new one.
Okay, well, good insight and good advice there, actually, to anyone that thinks they may have been impacted by it as well. Now, we haven't heard the full details yet of the EasyJet breach, but could you give us some examples of how cyber criminals might have got access to such a large amount of data?
Now, that would be, I mean, the challenge, I think, for now is that not only we don't know really enough details, but possibly also those numbers that have been given to us may also need to have further confirmation. The full analysis of complex of relatively complex things as as cyber attacks takes its time, right? And especially now in the times of generally disrupted business processes, also getting through so much analysis may be quite difficult, and to establish what exactly happened, how and where. But I think in my perspective, and this is no reflection on the state of EasyJet, but just general reflection on the market and pretty much all companies, that the usual source of, well, not source, but maybe a cause of being falling victim to those cyber attacks and data leakage or theft is effectively not keeping the basic cybersecurity hygiene at the standard which at reasonable standards. So, for example, having outdated pieces of software or hardware and so on, on the network. Cyber criminals generally focus on low-hanging fruit with the biggest sort of payback for them. That's not really necessarily always the case, especially when there is state players involved and potentially companies from defense industry and what have you. That has a different sort of different beast altogether. But for regular sort of commercial companies, usually the target is credit card data and this data that can be easily sold to someone else or monetized for the criminals. It is.
Well, you do raise an interesting question, or an interesting point rather, that we've touched on this show many times, that sometimes it's the basics that are vulnerable and allow an easy way in. I think until we perhaps get more details of what the breach entailed, we'll have to wait and see. But notice also that we've got Steve that's popped up, which to regular viewers can only mean one of two things. He's either got something insightful to say or he has a question. Steve.
Yeah, I've got a question, please, Stuart. Adam, it was interesting to hear your view on third-party risk. It's something we've heard a lot about this week. How the security risk, and there's been talk about potentially the need for some kind of bill of health from companies in the future. In terms of, if I'm going to engage in a contract with you, I want a bill of health on your cyber security. How big are risks in the supply chain, and do you think some kind of bill of health could help in that area?
Well, it's sort of a very wide topic, right, of how to get assurance that your extended enterprise is actually in a good position, cybersecurity wise, for example. Historically, we've been focusing on securing our own organizations, but now our organizations naturally grew larger because we have so many companies in our supply chain as partners or supplier services and products, and really we're in it together. The difficulty is that there hasn't been really a particular single standard developed in how to demonstrate, for example, from a supplier perspective, a certain compliance, a certain competency in managing cybersecurity. So the challenge, I think, is how to, on one hand, gain that confidence that your suppliers are doing a good job without, an auditing hell out of the, your hundreds, or in large corporations, thousands of suppliers out there, and they may also have a different level of coverage or ability to even present their cybersecurity. How do you reconcile all of this? I think the important bit is to also understand that by moving towards supply chains and using other companies for services, we inevitably have to accept more risk, because we will never be able to possibly control other organizations in the same way as we can control our own organizations. This is from a top management perspective, from executive management perspective. So especially the old school companies, I call them old school, historically very risk averse, have to really get used to operating at a certain level of risk or increased risk, and they really have to make provisions for what happens if things don't go up to the plan. So almost like raise their general business resilience. So there isn't really a very clear way. I mean, obviously some of it is getting certified like ISO 27001 or similar schemes. In the UK, this is Cyber Essential, so Cyber Essential Plus. There is some sort of ways of potentially demonstrating that competency, but we're still sort of waiting for a development, I guess, of that a little bit more tangible scheme where we can demonstrate to each other how well we're doing security and ensuring that our end consumers and customers are really well protected, irrespectively of who participates in the delivery of those products and services.
I think we lost your audio.
Right. You did lose me for a second there.
We did.
I'll pretend it wasn't user error, and
Yeah.
I'll ask my second question, and just forget that didn't happen. And what sorts of things should companies be looking for to manage supply chain risks, do you think?
Well, I think there isn't. You have to first realize and size the beast. How many suppliers do you have? And the usual way is sort of trying to at least start with IT suppliers, and this would be my sort of tip for organizations there. IT suppliers generally tend to deal with quite a lot of data sort of naturally, because that's why you buy IT services, right? To deal with the volumes of data and sort of computer processing. So that's a start, but you can't really have just IT suppliers as your only scope of assurance, right? Because you can very easily imagine situations where marketing department, for example, deals with quite a lot of marketing agencies out there for all sorts of in-country promotions and things like that. And someone else may actually deal with quite a lot of quite sensitive personal, for example, information which is being gathered on the business, and IT does not necessarily at that stage yet sort of enters the or does not enter the management of it, right, or doesn't have the oversight. So I think the first thing is the scope. The other thing is tiering your suppliers, right? Because there's obviously going to be some third-party suppliers who are very important to you and sort of critical for business operations. And there is some that you use occasionally. Do not spend an awful lot of time concentrating on those small, less important, what I would say, or less critical suppliers, and spend more of your time assuring around where the vast majority of risk is. And that's the other point, make sure that your magnifying glass is pointing into the right direction, when you're trying to do that. So consult with your business about who the most important suppliers are, what are the business critical processes. Also, things may look a little bit different from the traditional sort of IT perspective and the business perspective. So there is a lot of value also in that interaction and sort of learning about the way how company operates and how it can also be secured. I think, at least I, in my previous roles, have never sort of shied from getting advice from those business leaders, about where to concentrate my energy, the energy of my security team, in order to provide the best business value. And I think once you tier the suppliers, do talk to them, right? So don't assume, don't just read on the internet, but try to sort of cooperate human to human with them. Not always possible, especially if one of your suppliers is Amazon. They're reasonably responsive to massive companies with tens of millions of contract value. But if you're a small user of Amazon services, obviously, your interaction is going to be a little bit more limited. So then you basically should sort of focus more on already published information or some other available sort of sources. It is not really easy to to give you a very precise sort of guidance here, because companies are different, interactions are different, the sensitivity of information, the available resources. So I think everyone has to sort of size the beast themselves and then sort of find its own strategy. But do spend some time developing that strategy, because if you try to just run through it without having a plan, you will run out of breath.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, very, very interesting insight from you as well. Thank you for the questions, Steve, as well. So fascinating hearing your point of view today, Adam. Thank you very much for joining us on that piece, especially on such a breaking news cyber story that we've seen this week. It's pretty significant. So I appreciate your time on that today. Now, what we'd like to do, because of course today is Fun Friday, is ask you some kind of a light-hearted questions as well, just so the audience get a little bit more of an insight into you and your personality. So I would like to ask a few questions, if I may. So the first one I'm going to ask you is, what's your favorite isolation activity?
Well, actually, there's not so much isolation, but I specifically sort of pay attention to that. As a hobby, I teach children at primary school age judo, and you can probably see some of the judo belts here on the top shelf on my shelf. And I one of my favorite things is actually going outside, especially when there is a reasonably good weather, and at least practice a little bit of judo with my kids. Gives us both sort of all of us I guess a workout, and also sort of making them sort of a little bit more focused on continuing those activities where we in general lock down.
Excellent. Well, many years ago, actually, I used to learn judo as well, so I can certainly relate to that one. Thank you very much. Now, also, Adam, what was your first job?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I can tell you what my first job was in the IT industry. and I was 14 years
Excellent.
old.
Okay, we'll take that.
So I have learned how to program in assembler for the very old 8-bit computers. This is for those who remember Atari 800 XL or Commodore 64. And I have developed the procedures or programs to crunch and decrunch data in memory. So effectively compression and decompression of pictures. And I went to a local sort of game producing company back in Warsaw. I mean, we're now talking end of 80s. And I basically asked whether they're interested, and they truly struggled in packing quite a lot of game into 64 kilobytes of memory, right? So,
I can believe it. I can believe it.
I've
seen the early example.
So not only they were really impressed with that, but they also paid me some, eye-watering amount of money, which was sort of equivalent to my parents' income for about
Wow.
for about 3 months. So I was a very rich kid on the block for a couple of months, right?
Brilliant. Wow, excellent. And it puts my paper round to shame for sure. So thank you for that. And final question for you. What was your first car? I imagine it was something pretty spectacular, given that you had quite a lot in your piggy bank.
Absolutely. I mean, I was born and raised behind Iron Curtain, where car ownership wasn't a given, right? Only very few private individuals had cars. My first car was something that my grandfather have stored in the shed for nearly 15 years for me to inherit. The car is a Fiat 126. So it's a 600cc. If you know Fiat 500, that's basically a slight evolution of it, effectively designed end of 60s, beginning of 70s, and then mass produced in Poland on license. This was the car that effectively mobilized the nation in the same way as Mini did in the UK. So I had one of those, and being a very tall person, it wasn't really easy to get into it or out of it, right? But hey, least of the problem, right? The most important is that I had a car. So it was a lovely,
Brilliant.
and it was a bright green color.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Adam. And just for old time's sake, given it is my last show today, Steve, remind the audience what your first car was.
Hopefully this is the last time I have to mention my first car, because it is a bit embarrassing. So it was a Hyundai Pony. It was white with fake blue leather seats that got very sticky in this kind of weather. Wasn't particularly pleasant. And to make it look a little bit better, I used some tape to put a go faster stripe down the middle. I was pretty proud of it at the time. Looking back, maybe not so much so.
So Steve, don't feel bad about that car, right? Because by the time I had my old Fiat, and it was 18 years old when I inherited it, the Hyundai Pony that you've described was the car for directors.
Oh really? Oh wow! See?
Well, there you go, Steve. Even from those early days, you were destined for greatness, as you will be when you take the pinnacle of hosting this show for the remaining 3 episodes of the first series next week. So there we go. That story for me is never going to get old. I'm going to relay that one at every opportunity, Steve. So thank you for sharing that with us again. And thank you also for your time today to join us on our Fun Friday edition, Adam. It's been insightful, and I hope you found it a little bit of fun as well. Now, we are almost at the end of today's show, but before we do break for the weekend, let's hand over to Kerry just to get a bit of a wash up of this week's news, or today's news rather.
Great, thank you. So SC Magazine look at the 2020 Cyber Security Breaches Survey from the UK's Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, finding that the number of companies that are attacked at least once a week has increased by 50%. IEN Europe features a story today on cybersecurity in the age of IoT. It looks at how manufacturing companies are engaged in some kind of digital transformation initiative, but that the systems to be interconnected on a common IoT platform vary enormously. And then finally, the World Economic Forum has issued a report today looking into the utility sector and how cybersecurity has evolved to protect critical industry. That's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. And Steve, you pop back on screen. Interesting mix of news again today. I think the report from DCMS is interesting because it shows quite a significant spike, although it is worth noting this is from 2017, I think, to 2020. So quite a lot of time in the world of cyberspace there.
Yeah, and I think that what's also interesting is kind of do we become a little bit numb to some of these types of attacks as well? You know, that whole thing around what is an attack and what does each company see as an attack. I can imagine that if you think about kind of threats and attacks in a wider scale, every organization gets one every day, whether it's a phishing email or something like that, you know, and it may well be they never get to worry about it, never kind of filter in the way or something, but I would imagine it's pretty much every day, not you know, once a week. And then the other aspect as well is what do they not know about? What are the things where they've got threats on the network they've got no visibility of, and so they may think they've got a clean bill of health, but actually, you know, there's something nasty lurking on their network somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because we talk a lot about the evolution of the kind of the cyberscape, and you know, I think you raise a good point there that something that may have been, you know, a big deal back in the day is perhaps a regular occurrence in terms of trying to infiltrate a network right now as well. So it is also important to think about, you know, what the levels of those type of attacks are. And again, it comes down to this kind of notion of getting the basics right, because sometimes it's the real, you know, kind of the low-hanging fruit, and I think Adam mentioned it earlier, that makes it easy sometimes to infiltrate an organization. So thank you for that. Thank you for your views, and thank you all again for tuning in today. That is it for today, and indeed for another week. So I'd like to make special thanks to today's guest, Adam Drabik, to all of our other guests this week, to Steve and to Kerry, of course, and to all of you for joining us. Whatever else you do enjoy celebrating National Solitaire Day. Have an excellent rest of the day. And for now, at least, it's goodbye from me. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers.